Shiraz lost his voice. So I would have liked him up here, but securing the network. So there's a couple approaches. One would be the physical security, and of course the logical security. Much like in IT with administration, it's a moving target. It's a really wide area of expertise, and there's the visible deterrence, something as simple as signage, as opposed to building the infrastructure in such a way to prevent people from accessing it. And now with everything moving to the cloud and people working remotely, logical security has become more important with implementing, simple password security, securing the infrastructure, securing your data. So the leading question would be is, what do you want to secure? Why do you need to secure it? And how are you going to secure it? So touch on a bit on and of course with the fiber infrastructure, with fiber networks, and of course you have the wireless infrastructure, and ultimately securing the data that travels over that infrastructure. So falling back on, say, something as important as a health record. So a health record, you obviously need the highest level of security to protect the information from getting out, where you have encryption protocols, where you have encrypted data traveling over encrypted channels, either through the fiber network or through the wireless network. And then authenticating the users, not only authenticating the users that have permission to access the data, but making sure that the right people can access the data, and working with the privacy requirements of who can access the data and what data they can access. For medical records, obviously your medical professional would have access to your medical records, but a doctor that's in another organization that has never seen you or is not your healthcare professional, they do not need access to your health records. So having that separation of who can access and when they can access that information. To start with, largely depends on your organization as to what information you need to protect. So it kind of starts with the privacy piece. So when we talk about security, I think about privacy and security being two sides of the same coin, where they influence each other. So on the privacy side, I would start with a legal opinion as to what information needs to be protected and what level of protection it needs, and how you're going to protect it. And then that leads to the technologies that you need to implement, either something as simple as physical barriers. If it's a paper record, have it in a locked file cabinet behind a locked door inside a secure facility. If it's records on a computer, digital records, obviously having that computer protected so that somebody can't just simply walk out with it, having that information encrypted, and taking into account the backups for that information. So making sure that if somebody has access to the backup information, that information cannot be is not readable. So that's where the encryption technology comes in. Or as that information is being moved to an offsite backup, to make sure that information is encrypted as it moves across the network, either within the facility or outside the facility. So for my mind, the first step would be the privacy piece, having a legal opinion on where what privacy laws you need to follow based on the information. Did you want to go from there?
let me start by saying that this is not my core area of expertise, but Mozilla has embraced something called the lean data principles in terms of its approach to data, and you may have heard of the lean startup. This is a kind of approach to looking at your data from the point of view of what is it necessary to collect, and being clear about what data you're collecting and what data you're not collecting. I think that you know, the safest way to secure data is not to have it, in a way. You know, we talk about data as the new oil. I think it's more, you know, radioactive isotope might be a better metaphor, because if you're going to keep data, especially personally identifiable data about people, you have to have a very clear strategy for being able to secure it over the full term in which you retain that data. So lean data methodologies, you know, start by asking the question, you know, first of all, whose data do you have? You know, is it just your own data? Do you have other data from employees, from partner organizations, from customers? And then what is the nature of that data? Is it technical data? Is it user behavior? Is it, are they, you know, medical records, as we're discussed? And each of those will imply different strategies, and especially from the point of view of talking about what constitutes sensitive data. And dealing with sensitive data involves dealing with your stakeholders, right? And having a dialogue with the people who are implicated with this data to actually come to consensus on what is sensitive. I mean, the thing about privacy is all about expectation. If you know, if you confide a secret to a notorious gossip, you're not surprised when that gossip gets passed on. It's only when you confide that data to someone you expect to keep that secret that you are surprised and your privacy is violated when that is. So being in dialogue with the stakeholders of that data is absolutely essential to actually coming up with a strategy that that protects, you know, that conforms to their expectation of privacy. You know, data is contained in myriad and complex ways. You know, metadata is a very good example of that, in that even though you may have encrypted conversations, the metadata about those conversations may not be encrypted and may tell, you know, a revealing story about that. So it's important to look at the whole kind of, you know, ecosystem of data that's being captured by your system, and have a strategy for the whole of that, and not just your data, but your partners who keep data about you. So there are many, you know, third-party agencies that you engage with who are keeping your data. So that might be, you know, campaign organizations, or you know, it might be email, or it might be other kinds of services like survey services. You're giving out data when you use those services, and being clear about, you know, how you control the data that's shared with those third parties. And I think that sort of implies a kind of minimization strategy where you can review, do we need to collect this data? So for instance, you know, in some cases where you might normally collect, you know, personal data, name, phone number, address, maybe none of that information is required for the purposes. Maybe just a username is needed. So having that kind of, constantly asking that question, is this necessary data for us to collect, I think is essential to kind of keeping the scope of cybersecurity practices in check.
So just to touch on that point. So in Manitoba, there's well, federally, there's in Canada, there's PIPEDA, which the acronym escapes, but it's where you have the retail customer as the retail, the business, where they capture information about their customers. So if you go to, you know, purchase a car, for example, from a car dealership, The information that the car dealership captures about their customer, well, they have to have a valid reason for capturing that information. And they cannot just capture all the information just because it's available. They keep it in the records. So that's where the privacy impact assessment comes into play as to which rules or laws or policies, more so which laws you have to follow. The other one being FIPPA, or FIPPA, which is the education. That's the guide, the laws that they have to follow. Then there's the Privacy Act, or the FIA, Privacy Health, as what information they have to follow. In Manitoba's kind of unique in the fact that there's actually a Manitoba Privacy Act that applies to the people in Manitoba. So your province, or for the Americans, your states may have unique laws that they have to follow with what information they could capture, how long they have to retain those records. For example, medical records have to be retained for 25 years after your 18th birthday. So if you're 5 years old, you see a doctor, well, after your 18th birthday, they still have to keep those records for another 25 years. It's different requirements for different organizations. And the longer you have to keep that record, there's obviously a risk of, because if today the information, say, captured on or 10 years ago it was captured on a floppy disk, well, 20 years down the road, how do you read the information off this floppy disk? Or tape backup or some old technology. So it's not only the retaining the information, but it's also accessibility to the information down the road, as well as the confidentiality of the information and the integrity of the information to make sure it is accessible down the road. It's called the CIA triad. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is there are great resources online for embracing lean data practices and carrying out data audits for your organization. There are excellent tools available, and I'm happy to share those afterwards. I feel like there's probably a lot of expertise in the room looking in terms of people with experience on cybersecurity issues. So maybe it might be a better or a strategy at this point to open up to comments or questions or observations from the room. Don't everybody rush to the mic at once, though.
See some rumbling, but nobody's standing up. I guess we could fall back to the foundational stuff. Something as simple as a password. When I remember when I was little, I got my first bank card, and back then they gave you a 4-digit PIN, and at that time there was no option to change it. Here's your PIN. If you forget it, well, kind of good luck. You have to go back to the bank, and they have to send you out a secure letter with your new PIN on it. Now you can go to the bank and obviously change your PIN on your card. But most people nowadays, they still have that 4-digit PIN. So to try to get users to expand that to say, okay, well, go to an 8-digit PIN. Oh, that's too many numbers. Well, if you have a 4-digit PIN, just put it in twice. Just simple strategies to do that. Or have leading and ending numbers, say 99, your 4-digit PIN, 99. Okay, now you have an 8-digit PIN. Password strategies, well, there's password managers out there. I encourage you to use them. There's other technologies such as hardware keys where it's YubiKey. It's a plug for YubiKey. I really love the YubiKey. You can actually get a programmable YubiKey where you can program a static password on it. So you input it into your computer, it puts in the password, and then you can say add your PIN after it or add another password after it. So now you have you might have a 6-character password, but with this leveraging the technology, that 6-character password would be almost like a double-blind password, where one is coded on a device that may be 20 characters, then you put in your 6-character password, okay, now you have a 26-character password. There's somebody at the mic. You have a question?
Yeah. How would I secure my Xbox account from a hacker?
I guess the ultimate security would be to, put it in a box, fill the box with cement, and then drop it in the ocean. But it's just simple password security, like just simple. Use multi-factor authentication. You can receive a text message on your phone that has a one-time PIN number or one-time password on it. There's other technologies such as the Google Authenticator, or the other one that I like is Authy, because Authy you could put it on multiple systems, and it attaches to your password, or it attaches to your phone number, so you can restore it down the road. If something happens with your phone, you lose it, you get a new phone, keep the same phone number, then you can restore Authy, and that gives you a one-time password that expires every 30 seconds, and you could use that for multi-factor authentication. There's another question at the mic.
Yeah, it's not going to be about my Xbox. This one's about data sovereignty. Just wanted to know what your experience is with how data is being stored, where it's being stored, under which jurisdiction it's being stored, and how do you make sure that the data that you have in a cloud service, and in particular I'm talking about cloud services, making sure that that data is protected from, let's say, foreign interests?
Well, falling back to prior to Clearsky, with Clearsky, my prior role, or where the project started, was health. So on the health side, so in my mind, the health information is the highest level security that's required to protect your information. Compare that to, say, a restaurant menu. Well, a restaurant menu, you want everybody to be able to read it, obviously, but you don't want anybody to change it. So the different security requirements based on the information you're storing and where it's being stored is obviously vastly different from somebody's personal health record to a restaurant menu. As for with health records, encrypted data over encrypted channels, where you use multiple methods to protect the information, multiple methods to encrypt the data. So if there is a vulnerability or something compromised with either one of those technologies at some point in time, which I remember years ago there was a vulnerability found with Java, which affected the encrypted. If you were setting up a secure tunnel to move data to an offsite backup, because of that compromise, the data in the tunnel could be viewed. But with the health records, we were encrypting the information before it went over the tunnel. So it was encrypted data over an encrypted tunnel. So it was two levels of encryption. So that's how we're able to secure it. And as for the information being stored on the offsite backup, that information is encrypted on the offsite backup. And again, there you could employ multiple levels of encryption technology. So we for the encrypted channel, we 128-bit AES encryption. The data was encrypted 256-bit encryption, and then when it was stored on the offsite backup, it was also stored on an encrypted hard drive. So using the available technology where the hard drive itself had encryption built into it, so you had encrypted data on an encrypted hard drive. So if somebody pulled out the hard drive, all they would see is gibberish. So that's how. And this technology is not difficult to implement. I mean, this is all consumer off-the-shelf stuff. It's just taking the time and effort to research this information and obviously document it so that when the questions get asked either by leadership or government or whoever the overhead body is, that you have the documentation to support how you're encrypting the information. And additional layers to that would be multiple levels of authentication. So with the health records, we were not only authenticating the users, so the simple username and password, they log into the system, but the computers that they were using to access the information were also authenticated. So somebody couldn't bring in, the SYOM, spend your own money, or BYOD, bring your own device. So if somebody brought their home computer and tried to log into the secure system, even though they had a valid username and password, because the system itself wasn't authenticated with the network, they weren't able to access the information. So just having all that documentation in place. And the security safeguards on top of that. There was another point I was going to make. So authenticating devices, authenticating the users, encrypting the data in transit, encrypting the data at rest, as well as on the backup, which creates this additional creates additional challenges, especially if you have to restore the information. And also verifying the backup to make sure that the backup wasn't corrupted while in transit. So you need those pieces in place to make sure the data is valid. So having those testing tools in place, as opposed to your typical user, which is username and password. I always like to use when it comes to administrative or admin systems, I always use a +1 system, where if the regular user is username and password, well, then the admin system would be username, password, plus an additional layer, multi-factor. If you're putting antivirus on a computer for the consumer, well, on the admin system, there would be the same antivirus plus something else on the admin system. So if the consumer system was, or the regular user system was compromised, that same compromise could not be used to compromise the administrative system, hopefully, because it has that extra layer of security on it from your regular systems.
And I would just add, at a very high level, it's very, the simple answer to data sovereignty is to, store things on your own servers. But the very appeal of cloud services like Amazon and Microsoft and others is the fact that when you store data on their services, it's replicated, right, across the world, right? And so it is a very resilient way of storing data, because even a kind of, local act of God is not going to necessarily disrupt that data. So if you're storing data locally, you have to have a strategy that is going to be robust enough to cope with an event that might knock out your local resources.
In addition to that, so I mentioned FIPA, PIPEDA, FIA, Manitoba Privacy Act. With the First Nations, you have to obviously respect the OCAP principles. So how does information get from point A to point B to make sure that information doesn't transit across the U.S. border, it stays in Canada, or stays local to the community? And then when it comes to respecting the own control, access, possession, where keeping it on your own device, or at least where if the information is stored in a cloud storage, where they have the First Nation has access to the keys to access the unencrypted version of the data. So that's kind of where the sovereignty piece would fit into that. Is another question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to something along the lines of like the principle of least privilege. Like in this case, like if you could speak to the principle of least privilege, especially when it comes to access roles, like.
I'm sorry, the principle of
least privilege. So with a lot of these systems, a lot of these cloud systems, it's basically, you log in as a user, you have access to this data, and then you can, do something with it, right? And the more that you're giving everyone access to something, well, what happens when their account becomes compromised or something? So I'm just wondering if you can speak to the way that data itself is organized in terms of like who has access to it, who can like upload things or download things or delete things or even just like see records, and then how do you organize that information in such a way that like when users are logging in, they're only really having access to things that they should have access to, in part to respect these privacy laws, but also in case something goes wrong and their account becomes compromised, you don't want somebody accidentally, just because they're like chief and counsel or something, that thinks that they have the political authority to access all this data, but then their account becomes compromised because they clicked on a link, and then, you know, now your entire system is screwed. Does that make sense?
There was one word in there I couldn't quite understand, or couldn't wait to hear what you were saying, but I think I got the gist of it.
Yeah, the principle of least privilege.
Oh, principle of least privilege.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that would fall under user permissions. So having the policies and procedures in place of who has access to what information. Again, falling back on medical information, you know, your doctor would have access to your medical records, but a doctor outside that you've never seen that doesn't have the permission to see your medical records should not be able to see your medical records. Of course, there's exceptions to that. You know, if you're in an accident, you have to go to the emergency ward, then the emergency doctor would have access to your records. That would fall under the logging of the information of who accessed your information, what, or when they accessed your information, how long they spent accessing your information, and the follow-up to that would be the auditing process. So that would fall under policies and procedures to have the organization, you know, review those logs to see who accessed what information when, and to make sure they had a valid reason for accessing that. When it comes to the cloud infrastructure, passwords are still around. They're going to be around for a while, but with, you know, blockchain and other technologies, tokens are probably going to become the new standard, where you log into like an identity manager and it passes a token back and forth to authenticate the user with the system. Then you can implement more automation for user permissions, implementing other technologies such as like a web access firewall, where you can limit the amount of traffic that goes between systems. So if somebody's trying to do a brute force attack on a system, you can say, you know, instead of locking the user for, say, 30 minutes after 10 failed attempts, well, then that becomes a denial of service attack. With other technologies where you could say you could limit, say, 10 login attempts and then you throttle it. So if it's, you know, somebody trying to do a brute force attack, then instead of it theoretically taking, you know, if they could try, you know, 1 trillion tries a minute, with that limitation in place now, instead of it taking, you know, say, an hour to crack your password, it might take, you know, 200 years to crack your password in theory. So it's just utilizing technology that's out there. Obviously logging the information, who has access to what, and the user permissions of that would fall under the administrative for the system. You know, a doctor, a nurse, they would have different access. As opposed to, you know, system-to-system communication, which is often quite ignored, where you have a server talking to another server. Especially with one of my pet peeves is print servers. So everybody and their dog has access to a print server. Well, if the print server gets compromised, server-to-server traffic is usually not part of the log events. So if somebody accesses the physical, or somebody has access to the print server, they could access other file servers to be able to compromise information. Which is why when I set up a network, my print server is always on a separate, you know, separate logical network with 2 network cards in it. But anyway, I don't want to get in the weeds a little bit about that. I don't know, do you have anything to add?
Only that the lean data methodology embodies an audit and that audit is a conversation that you have about, because ultimately to embody least privilege, you have to understand people's jobs and what they have access to, and that's going to be a conversation. So the audit can be a vehicle for those conversations to operationalize that kind of thing.
Which is, yeah, something you cannot do, obviously, with a paper record. You know, it's a physical piece of paper. Whoever has access to that paper has, well, access to the paper, and there's no way to know who that person, you know, who read the paper, when and where, which is one of the advantages of all digital records, is all that information can be logged. Then it goes through the audit process. This question?
Thanks, Bill and Steve, for your information. I just got a question in regards to cybersecurity support frameworks in Canada. In Quebec, we have the provincial cybersecurity framework that's supporting municipalities and the education, the provincial institutions, but not specific to First Nations. And then we have the federal one, protecting federal systems and what have you. So we see a gap in Quebec, and we're trying to address that. If you were to ask me how many cybersecurity technicians we have in our 22 members, and it's zero. It's the cost to employ them. These are experts that are cost more to attract. Actually, they're too expensive to maintain by one community. So these are, challenges in implementing these types of supports. So what we're trying to do is raise the awareness that a cybersecurity framework is needed for First Nations to support that, and to help support data sovereignty activities like we're doing in Quebec as well. By the end of this year, the chiefs are going to be signing off on a data management framework to govern data, to respect OCAP and all these things. But to do that, you need a security framework to support it. That piece, right? And then you have the other networking piece, you have the system piece. So I think I just wanted to get your thoughts on the importance of a cybersecurity framework.
Yeah, definitely. It's well, with IT infrastructure, it's a moving target, and when we talk about cybersecurity, it's a broad field, much like working with network admins. You might have a network administrator dedicated to email, another one dedicated to the file system, another one dedicated to the switching equipment and the routers, somebody dedicated to desktops. Much like in the cybersecurity field, you may have somebody that specializes in the cloud infrastructure, or somebody that specializes in securing the desktops or laptops, somebody that works in mobile devices, the smartphones or other handhelds or tablets. Going back, so the very first step would be a legal opinion as to what privacy laws you need to follow, and then using that as a guide to develop your framework, and then making sure your framework matches up with the privacy requirements of the data you're protecting. Then the next step to that would be your current state analysis. So it all leads. So the current state analysis, and then you want to get your future state. So how do you get from your current state to future state? And with cloud infrastructure and developing technologies, it's always a moving target. But you could always reference back to the framework document as your guiding principles, because your current state is going to be changing. When I was working in education, the task I was given was to actually do a current state analysis of the education system. So as I was working with the admins to try and figure out what the existing environment, I would find problems with the environment, security concerns and stuff. The admins would go ahead and fix it. I'm trying to do a current state analysis, and you keep fixing the problems that I'm finding, so it's difficult to do a current state. So I had to do a rollback and do a security framework for the network, and then I did another one for the desktop environment. For the guidelines for the text to follow to secure the environment, and then that eventually progressed from from on-prem servers, which was the current state at that time. That was 10 years ago now. So on-prem equipment, or physical servers within the environment is always going to be a necessity. But then migrating to a cloud environment where you get people working from home. But then if you have a computer that fails, downloading all information from the cloud environment to be able to restore it on the computer is one of the challenges that I have in our environment. So I do have a system in the environment that has all the data on it locally. So if I do have a system failure, I can, instead of having to download all information from the cloud, I have a local copy that I could pull it from. But all information is backed up to the cloud. And I'm always paranoid about losing data. So for our network, I have 5 copies of all the data. So there's one local copy on the computer, there's one external hard drive, and then there's actually 3 cloud backups. But one of the cloud backups is a cloud-to-cloud backup. So, worst case scenario, if something gets compromised, at least there's like an independent cloud backup that sits there that none of the systems have really direct access to. Because if something gets corrupted down the road, then you have that point in time backup where you can restore valid data rather than trying to restore the data then finding out it's corrupted. Sorry, I went off on a bit of a tangent there, but having the security framework as the guide for your current state, future state, and to make sure that framework follows the privacy requirements of the information you're trying to protect.
Well, I'm just, again, conscious of the expertise that exists in the room on this topic. I know we have one of the conference sponsors here, Canary. Maybe you'd like to comment on, emerging cybersecurity priorities for Canary, very briefly.
That's a great question.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Steve. So at Canary, we recently had our...
Closer to the mic.
Okay, sure. At Canary, we have recently got news of the renewal of a mandate for the next 5 years. And within that mandate, cybersecurity is a big topic for us. We're currently working with our NREN partners in the provinces and the territories across Canada to develop a federated SOC, Cybersecurity Operations Center. So this is great news, I think, to securing the higher education sector. And I joined the comment from my colleagues from Quebec. I think it's fair to say that the sector has traditionally run into various challenges, primarily because of the challenges to retain skills, cybersecurity analyst skills primarily. But beyond that, of retaining those skills to enhance the cybersecurity posture of the sector, when we talk from the perspective of people, processes, and technologies, traditionally we've been behind from other sectors to invest and put in the resources, both from from the tools that we need to use. And we're hoping that through this funding and through these efforts of various partners across Canada, that we'll be able to keep up with advances in technologies and retaining talent. I think retaining talent is a big for us. And we can't do this alone, so I think the issue of collaboration is key in this area. The amount of investment is so big that you cannot go at it alone. So it's important that we keep the notion of collaboration and cross-fertilization across the sectors and across the partners. We traditionally, early in the stages, back to your comments on assessment, you cannot think about moving or enhancing the posture if you don't know where you're at. I think that's an important element about it, and we've traditionally used the NIST framework to understand where we're at in terms of the universities, but also of the different end partners collaborating. So we run a survey on a yearly basis where we, and it's basically based on the NIST framework, and several, I'm not sure how many actually universities end up actually answering that surveys, but I don't have the right number. 200, close to 200. So it's a great sort of a snapshot of where we're at. And because we're doing it on a yearly basis, then we can better understand the evolution of the progress in terms of the nature of the tools that we're putting in place, in the governance structures, and the operational skills that we need to implement it over time. So that, I think, it's a very element to look into as we move forward, yeah. And we're happy to have further conversation on this if there's interest.
Great, thank you for your comments. Okay, yeah, a couple of thoughts came to mind with network admin. I touched on earlier. Well, network admins that are fresh out of college or out of the technical training, if you haven't locked yourself out of your own server yet, well, keep going. That's kind of one of the badges that you have to pass through to really be familiar with the environment. And that sort of leads into being able to roll it back. So if you mess up the system or you implement new security measures that lock out all your users or lock out your admin, knowing how to roll that back to a previous state where it was working. So very important to have that process and know how to roll back the system in case you mess it up. You put a 0 instead of a 1 or something, and now everything doesn't work. So it's just simply not implementing the security measures, but doing the legwork beforehand to, okay, what can go wrong? How will it go wrong? What potentially could go wrong? How do you break it? How do you fix it? So it's not just as simple as, oh, $1,000 for the package, let's install it and run with it. Well, if you deploy it to your network of 100 users and then nobody's able to log into their system, well, that's obviously a major problem. So you have to do the testing and the due diligence to make sure it's going to work as expected, and then if it does mess up, know how to roll that installation back to a working state. Anything to add?